Hey everybody, thanks for joining me here today. This is Nicole with Topaz, and today's session is going to be about creating digital art with Topaz Simplify. Topaz Simplify gives you the tools to very quickly create many types of digital art, resulting in all sorts of effects, such as beautiful painterly effects and really graphic effects. So today we're going to be going beyond the basic presets and delving into some of the tools that allow you to really make the digital art your own. The first thing that I'm going to do is just show you some of our before and afters that I have, and then we'll take an image in and show you how to create some things. So the first image I'll show you, let's see here. This image, I always love using this image. We're not going to use it here today, but I did want to show you some of the effects we've been able to achieve in the past. This is the before image, which is really lovely in and of itself. But taking into Topaz Simplify only, I was able to create very flat watercolor type of an effect with really beautiful edges that had this lovely kind of watercolor edge effect as well. But taking the same image, I was able to create a more painterly effect. Now, this is not like Topaz Impression where you're going to have realistic brush strokes with Topaz Impression. This is more of a graphic type of painterly effect. And it uses a different technology, and we'll go over that technology here shortly and how it's different from some of our other artistic plugins. The other image after image that I have is a more oil painterly effect that has a bit more contrast and a little bit more structure to the different splotches of color. The next image, here's our before image, which is beautiful, but if I wanted to create a little bit more of an artistic, a graphic artifact, one of my favorite ways of doing that is using our Buzz Sim preset. The Buzz Sim preset allows you to just come in and eliminate a lot of the distracting details, but still keep the form and color of your image. And so we'll be looking at those today as well. This is a picture of cherry trees and all sorts of effects that you can achieve in Simplify. This is a line and ink type of an effect, and one of the greatest things that you might not know about Topaz Simplify is using the different type of modes, the background, the edges, and then the combined modes to really create exactly what you're looking for. And so that's, we're going to take a look at that today, but here are some other after images as well. And lastly, this is the before image. One of the most recent types of effects that I've really had fun creating is kind of a coloring book effect or a crayon kind of an effect where it gives you a lot of texture within these colors, but it's not super heavy. So we're going to be going over how to create that very easily today as well. And here's a more simplified graphic type of painting. We'll go ahead and take this sunflower image in first, just to show you some of the overall presets first, and then going beyond that into the right-hand side of Topaz Simplify. If you're new to Topaz Simplify, the technology behind it is really important to know about so you can understand how it's creating the looks that you're getting. It's a size-based technology behind it, and as you simplify your image, it's going to remove the smallest details and then medium details, and then it's going to flatten those large details as well. So you can start to get a very minimal image. I'm just going to open this up real quick just to show you what I mean. As I take this to the right, more details start to disappear. So instead of adding from your image, or adding things into it, we're removing to create different types of graphic digital art. I'm going to take that Simplify size slider all the way back down and start over here on the left-hand side. You can achieve many different looks just by starting off with the presets. So we have our Buzz Sim collection. The reason that we have that whole collection is because we used to just have a few Buzz Sim presets, and they were so popular that we created a whole collection in Topaz Simplify 4. So here you have all different types of Buzz Sim that's going to kind of give you more graphic type of painterly effects. Let's go to 100% so you can really see what's happening here. Here's before and after. Here's the original Buzz Sim. Before and after, you're still keeping a lot of the lines and texture in there, but removing a ton of it as well. So it's a very interesting effect. The next is detail removal and enhancement. This is a more technical use of Topaz Simplify, and one of the ways that I actually use it the most. We're not going to really be talking about it here today, but it's a fantastic way of removing dust and scratches from older images, such as archived images or film that you might have scanned in and you need to work with. The dust removal possibilities here are beautiful. And then the spot removal goes a little bit higher and really eliminates those even more. And when you can go in and work with our local adjustments, you can just apply that in the areas you want just to remove the dust and spots. All right, so line and ink collection. This is where you really start to see the different possibilities of the more graphic effects. So you can do things like black line only. And if you understand how the program is working over here on the right-hand side, which we're going to be showing you here in a moment, you can come in and really work with creating your own type of sketch effects that allow you to remove and simplify down to just the type of effect you want. So very cool stuff there. We have different cartoon effects that you can start off with. Here you're not going to be able to achieve the same type of cartoon effects if you mixed a couple of our programs together, but you really can go very far with this effect. The next collection is going to be painting effects, and you're going to have all different types of painting effects, from watercolor, oil painting, and this again isn't going to be super realistic like brush strokes, but it's going to give you that more graphic feel to it. One of my favorite, just so you know, we're going to be covering this on Thursday in our Quick Tip Thursday, but for those of you that aren't able to join us, one of my favorite things lately has been combining Simplify and Impression, starting off with an underpainting effect in Simplify to really remove a lot of unnecessary detail, and then take that underpainting effect into Impression, and not having to worry about it creating these brush strokes for this detail that I'm not interested in. Let's jump into the right-hand side and how you can go beyond the presets to really make it your own. I think the very first thing that you really need to know is these combined base and edges mode. If you're not familiar with them, definitely get familiar with them. Combined is going to include both your base, which is your background color, and your edges that are created during your session in Simplify. So, for example, if I come over to maybe, let's say I have a Simplify size going and I've created some edges as well. If I wanted to view them separately, that's one way of working with these modes. So here's my base, and then just my edges. So you can really see how you're applying those edges to your image, and then you can look at the combined after effect. One thing you need to know about Simplify is it's going to be best viewed at 100%, so I'm going to go ahead and do that now. You really get to see how it's affecting your image at 100%. When you're zoomed out any smaller than that, it's going to be a little bit different whenever you process it back into your host program. So I always tell people, look at it at 100% to make sure you're going to take exactly what you want back into your host. So I think one of the first effects that we can kind of play with here today is maybe kind of a coloring book effect with those edges and base mixed together in interesting ways. And I think that it shows you, that process really shows you how you can create these unique effects. I'm going to come down and press Reset All and get back to 0 and shut down everything here and go into my edges mode first. When I'm creating line type of graphic effects, I like to start off in my edges to make sure that the edges are exactly what I want. If you go into your edges from the beginning after you reset all, you're just going to see a white blank screen because by default edges aren't created. But if you open up your Edges tab, which is in the Global Adjustments area, you can quickly add edges by taking your edge strength and moving it to the right-hand side. And you'll start to create edges based upon the subject in your image. Now I am going to come out to fit mode just so you can see the whole image. But again, understand 100% is better to view when you're actually working at home. All right, for this effect, I'm going to take edge strength all the way up to 5 because I'm trying to create as many edges as I can just to see what I have. So by default, the edge type is going to be color edge normal. We have 8 different types of edges or lines for you to use. So I like to come down to mono edge normal to get a black outline, to kind of get that coloring book effect crayon and ink, but you can choose any of those to create more of your own looks. Some people aren't aware of this inverse color. It's very cool. If you press inverse color, you're going to invert the black and the white when you're in the mono edge. It's basically just going to give you that black background, and then when you're in a color edge, you'll just have that black background instead of the white background, but you'll still have that color edge that you're creating. So you can really come up with some cool effects with that inverse color. I'm going to stay with the mono edge normal. And again, take that edge strength all the way to the left. If you want to see how many edges you have, you can take down the Simplify, Reduce Weak, and Reduce Small, which by default are somewhat reducing the lines in your image, because without it, you have a ton of small little texture lines, and even in very smooth areas like this blurred out sky, you'll start to see just blotchiness. So by default, that is taken up a little bit, but if you're trying to produce this effect that I'm showing you, taking it down will actually help you. So now that you see all of your edges, you can come in and simplify. The Simplify edge is going to reduce both the small and the weak edges at the same time. So it's reducing and simplifying the edges in your image in an intelligent way. If you'd rather just reduce the weak lines, you can do that by taking that reduce weak to the right, or if you'd rather reduce just the small, not the weak, so we want to keep these background lines, but maybe I don't want all of these very small lines in the middle of my sunflower, I can say reduce small, and I'll see more of those smaller lines disappear, but the weaker edges stay. So you can reduce those and get exactly the type of lined image that you want. Now, one of the, when I'm doing this effect, I'm just going to kind of show you a trick real quick. Instead of going back into the combined mode and working with my color, with the adjust, and trying to figure out everything, I've actually figured out that if I go to my edges, leave it there, shut down my global adjustments, come into my finishing touches, we have something called transparency. Transparency is going to show you the original image. So you can kind of bring in original color, not all of it, maybe leave it about 0.3 or something like that, and you start to get just the hint of color back. This is a great starting point for the really enhancing the color a bit more, because now you have this texture and some color to work with. But you might be saying, okay, well, how do I move on from here if you don't want me to go into my global adjustments and work on my color here? We have something in Simplify that carries over from some of our other programs, and that's the Apply button. The Apply button is going to allow you to stay within Simplify and continue to apply effects as you move forward with your workflow. So if you're coming up with your own unique workflow like we're doing here, using this Apply button to your advantage to keep creating beyond just the presets over here, because the presets don't combine to applies. That's how you really go beyond and you really push the effect, is being able to kind of start from fresh at a certain point in your workflow. So I'm going to press apply. So if I go to my before and after, you see that on the left hand side is my before image. That is now this image. And now I can go up into my global adjustments, into my adjust panel, which controls the brightness, the contrast, and dynamics and detail of your image, and work with this to really work with the color. So for me, what I like to do is to come into the saturation and just boost that up. And usually what I find is that it'll boost up the most saturated colors and leave the desaturated colors like this green and blue pretty pale. So one way to work with that is coming down to the saturation boost, and then you'll see those desaturated colors really pop up and match the saturated colors. So it feels more like a coloring book effect now because all of them have the same type of saturation. The last thing that you really want to know about within this adjust panel for this kind of an effect is things like the dynamic slider, the structure slider, and the structure boost. This is going to allow you to really create some hard lines and kind of textured lines like you might find when you're doing a coloring book effect. Let me go ahead and take that structure down and just work with my dynamics though. And this was something that just playing around with all the different modes and working with them individually, you can come up with quite easily. The next one I want to talk about is more of kind of a painterly effect and the different types of painterly effects you're able to get. So let's cancel out of, or actually we'll press OK and get back into Photoshop. Let's take in this field of flowers. We'll go ahead and do a more painterly effect that has more structure to it and edges first, and then we'll do one that has more softness applied to it. When you're working with Topaz Simplify, usually it's going to apply the last used settings like it did here, so I'm going to go ahead and press Reset All and get back to normal. Note that it didn't apply it only applies the last used settings after the last time I pressed apply, so it only was working on that color and dynamics, not the actual overall coloring book effect, if you're wondering why that wasn't applied. So for this image, I'd like to first work with the Simplify tab. This is usually where I start off with in any workflow. The Simplify size is the most important slider within Simplify because this is the main technology. As you take this up, you start to remove areas that you might just not need in your image. So it's going to remove the smallest details first, keep going until it almost gives you a completely flat, kind of splotchy color look that doesn't have much detail. If you stop at a certain point, it'll even start to give you a stained glass effect, which can be pretty cool in the right type of image. I'm going to take this, oh, we're at 100%, that's great. Okay, so if I wanted to create more of a painterly effect that had more edges, this is a great program to do that in because there's a lot of things going on in this field. My eyes are traveling everywhere in here and not going to these flowers. But as I take my Simplify size slider down or up and reduce some of these highlights and unnecessary details, the flowers start to become the subject and they really start to pop. So once you find the right Simplify size, if you're trying to get this painterly effect, I recommend anywhere between 0.2 and 0.3. It's kind of going to give you enough information to still maintain your subject, but take out a lot of the distracting elements and give you a more graphic artifact. The next thing is the feature boost. And the feature boost is actually essential to this type of painterly effect if you're going for something that needs a little bit more structure and boost. Taking that feature boost up will start to kind of increase the contrast between different elements. Most of the time in these types of images, you're going to see some of these colorful artifacts start to appear, really bright colorful artifacts, and that's intentional for the painterly effect. However, sometimes it doesn't really work with images and it doesn't really work here for me. We give you the option of eliminating those more colorful artifacts and just working with a more natural color. So changing your color space from RGB to YCBR will give you still a lot of feature boosting and contrast without those super colorful artifacts coming in. So I like the feature boost right at 1 here. If I want to play with my details, I can a little bit more, but I want to show you what I would do to continue. I don't really need to play with my details here, so I'm going to shut down the Simplify. Within Adjust, you can continue with that boosting of the color and edges in a more natural way than just adding in edges, and that's the dynamics or structure sliders. For this type of effect, I find that the structure sliders really will give me some interesting edges that give me a painterly, more graphic painterly effect. And then the structure boost will just take that really over the top, so I'm a little bit more careful with that structure boost slider usually when trying to create these more painterly effects, but the structure will really add some nice depth to those lines. And then the dynamics can help to work with the localized contrast, open up some of those shadow areas, and bring some more tone into the highlights and color into the highlights to give you a more even and balanced image. Then you can come in and work with your saturation and saturation boost if you'd like to really start to get the colors you're interested in. I'm going a little bit brighter here, which I like. The next area is going to be the edges, and I'm actually fairly happy with my edges, so I'm not going to use them in this workflow. That's another thing. You don't have to use everything, just use exactly what you need to create the effect that you're after. So with this one, I've created some really nice edges with my structure sliders, and I'm not needing the actual edges tab, so I'm just going to leave that alone. And the global adjustments, I'm going to go ahead and click that off and hop into the finishing touches. Finishing touches is also an area where you really get to make things your own. The quad tone specifically gives you so much control over tone and adding interesting color into your image. I'm going to go ahead and click that on and then open it on up. And you'll see that there's 4 default tones in there as well. Basically, it's adding 4 tones into your image, 1 in the shadow regions, 1 in the lower midtones, 1 in the higher midtones, and 1 in the highlights. And then you get to control how strong those tones are being applied into your image with this tone strength. So if I want them applied a lot, or I don't want the image shown very much, I can take this tone strength down to 0.35, and it gives me less of my original image. If I want more of my original image coming through, I'll take that to the right and bring back in more of that image while still having a little bit of tone and playing around with it. For this image, I'm going to take this down to about 0.5 and really create my own type of image. I want to make more of maybe a blue and yellow cast to this effect, or to this painterly effect. So what I would do is open up my color 1 region, which is my shadow area, and I would maybe select a blue. And then take that way down over here on the right. Whenever you open up the color swatch, this select color color picker will come up, and you can choose the color and then choose the tone over here, and I'm just choosing a really deep, deep blue. And I'll say OK. Now we get to the brown. And instead of the brown, I'm just going to move my selector here to blue, actually a little bit more cyan-y. I'm going to come up with that tone and say OK. And you can see how different that is now just by changing that one tone. Now into the pink, if I want to make, again, more of a yellow highlights, I'm just going to drag that over to my yellow area. And I'm going to go a little bit heavier here of saturation. That'd be good. Say OK. And now you really start to see that yellow coming through on the highlight areas. Lastly, we have the white. And I'm going to take that to more of a cream or yellow and say OK. And there you have it. So here's before, here's after. We have more of a bluish yellow tone cast going to this image. Again, you can take that tone strength and really blast it by taking it to the left or taking all of it out by going to the right, just getting the right mix for you. If you ever find that the tone's not being placed exactly where you want it, these Color 1 region sliders are really helpful. Basically, you can think about the region sliders from 0 to 255 as being black to white, so shadows to highlights. If you want this dark blue applied in the shadows, take your slider all the way to the left. If you want this blue applied in the midtones, lower midtones, that's why we're on this lower midtone range. Sometimes you want the blend to be a little bit different. So if I want more blue in my image, I can maybe go to the right and have the blend between the dark blue and the lighter blue be a little bit longer. Or if I want to have more yellow, which I think I do, I'm going to work with this upper midtone or lighter midtone region slider. So I hope that gives you a quick example of how you can really get unique tone that you might be after very quickly in this program. So very cool stuff. All right, the next type of workflow I'd like to show you is more of a softer painterly effect, or actually we'll go into a different one. We're going to go into a line and ink effect, which I think is really important to know about how to flatten out your image, because it used to, in Simplify 3, you couldn't get this effect very well, and now you can. All right, so let's get over to here, and this is the effect that I'm going to try to achieve very quickly. So I'm going to open up this background image, go Filter, Topaz Labs, Topaz Simplify. And the last few settings have just been applied, which are actually quite beautiful, lovely, but that's not what I'm looking for, and I also want to be at 100% to really see what's happening in this workflow. So before and after, I'm going to press Reset All and get back to my original image. And the first thing that I want to do is look at my lines first. So I'm going to come up into my global adjustments and look at my edges tab, which again is going to be nothing. What I'd like to do is just get a very nice same size line going around these trees. Not super detailed, but so not a lot of small and texture lines, but the larger lines of the main subject. So I'm going to go into my Edges tab, and I'm just going to take my edge strength up. And I'm actually just going to take my edge strength all the way in and get all the lines that I possibly can and work with it from there. That's one way that I've found that I really like to work with. Instead of the color effect, I'm going to go to Mono Edge. The difference between Mono Edge and Mono Line is going to be the width. The line options are going to be the same size lines throughout the image. The edge ones are going to have thicker edges, thinner edges. For this particular workflow, I'm actually more interested in lines and just getting a line and ink effect like I showed the after image before, and all of those lines are a standard size. So this is how you would create a standard size line. So now that I have my edge strength all the way up and my Simplify Edge, now I'm going to take my Simplify Edge and start taking that up. I know that I'm looking to eliminate all of these texture lines while still maintaining some texture lines and the main lines within my trees. So all of these texture lines within the grass and things like that are actually weak. They're longer lines, so you can kind of see the lines just going throughout, but they're pretty weak. So I know that coming into my Reduce Weak is going to really help to reduce some of those weaker texture areas while still maintaining these nicer or thicker lines. Right away, I'm going to come down to my Flatten Edge now that I've reduced my weak and kind of take those lines and boost that up so I can get thicker lines. Flatten Edge is really an important thing to know about if you're wanting to create cartoon effects or this line and ink effect, because you can really control that thickness. All right, one thing to know about is the Reduce Small does not work when you're in the line modes. It only works in the edge modes, so don't think that it's not working if you come to the Reduce Small and it's not reducing the small. That is something within the program. So you can just work with your Reduce Weak and the Simplify Edge to get it to an area where you want. So here I feel like I might have something, but because I don't see my background color, I'm not sure. So I'm going to go into my Combined, and I see the original color seeping through with these lines on top of it. What I want to do now is just get a very flat effect. So instead of taking a look at the lines and everything, I just want to take a look at the base color and eliminate the line view for a bit. I'm going to go to that base color and go into my Simplify tab. Simplify is going to, again, start to remove those details. But even if you take the Simplify size slider all the way up, you still see some of these transitions of color within the um, within the grassy area and other areas, there's still that transition of color. It doesn't feel really flat. The feature boost is something that I have to stay away from in this effect because it's only going to add in more transitions of color. And I can only remove so many smaller weak details. So for this effect, because we have in Simplify 4 this edges, this adjust panel that now includes structure and structure boost, go in there and take your structure boost to the left, and you start to eliminate those actual edges of the transition. It becomes much more smooth, much more flat. So you can really flatten out that image, flatten out the color. I'm now going to go back into my Simplify and simplify that more. And now I have a much more simplified image here. Let me get right about there. Perfect. And maybe I'll reduce some of these smaller details, reduce some of those weaker details. And now I'm going to look at my combine mode. And adding back in those lines starts to really give me a very unique line and ink drawing. So I hope that kind of shows you, it's somewhat different than what I got in this original one, but that's a very similar process to what I used. So I hope that gives you a good workflow tips into creating this type of an effect. The last one that I wanted to kind of go over that I feel is important, there's some little tips to know about that we don't do within our presets where you do have to go beyond to really get certain effects. It's more of a flat painterly effect or a sort of watercolor, but even flatter than a watercolor. So let's take in I wanted to take in the form. There we go. This is a good one. Let me just make a quick copy, and I'll take that into Simplify. And the first thing I want to do is simplify the image. Within flatter type of painterly effects, you don't have a ton of this texture detail and edge detail, so going in and working with that Simplify slider just to eliminate distracting details and really get down to the form of your subject is important. So with this type of an effect, I usually find myself going to about 0.5 or 0.6, just eliminating things that I don't necessarily want in my image. If I wanted to keep some of that detail, I could easily take that back down, but I don't really need to. So I'm pretty happy here. Here's before, here's after. So I have this nice flatter effect going on. But now you say, okay, how do I get a more watercolor smooth effect? And I'm going to shut down the Simplify because we don't even need to use that anymore and go directly into the Adjust. And it's very similar to what we just did with the smoothing out of the ink type of effect with the trees. Here you would work with your color sliders, your brightness sliders, your saturation, and then your structure as well. To get kind of a watercolor effect, I usually like to take my brightness up, kind of give me a nice bright base, and then use my contrast slider or my dynamic slider to bring back in some nice contrast to the image. And then the saturation boost is nice if you're trying to get a more colorful image, of course. And then we get to the structure and structure boost, and this is where you can either go heavier on those structure elements or smoother. So we want to be smoother, so I'm going to take that down to the left. And now I have smoothed out these patches of detail really beautifully to start getting a much more softer transition like you might find within a watercolor effect. However, within most watercolor effects, you do tend to see edges, especially where the two tones of color come together. And usually it's fairly simple edges, but they're there. So I tend to go into the edge as well to start edges tab to create those edges. And this is one where I keep the color edge because it just makes sense. I don't need a black line to represent colored paint. So I'll keep my color edge, and let me go up to 100% for this, maybe even 200%. There we go. And as you take that edge strength up, I don't take it up too much for this effect. You really just start to see a nice edge form along the main details in your image, which you would find in certain watercolor effects. So you can kind of get that really cool edges very simply by keeping the color edge the way it is, taking that edge strength up. If you find that you think that it's maybe adding too many edges back in, you can still work with your Simplify edge, reducing those weak lines and just getting the edges that you want. Here's before and after. And if you want fatter edges, you can always do that within this fatten edge line. Here's before and after. If you have any questions, you can contact us at webinars@topazlabs.com. And again, sign up for upcoming sessions at topazlabs.com/webinars. I'm going to be doing lots of artistic effects sessions since we are promoting Simplify through the end of May. So you'll see things like how to use Simplify and Impression together to get the best type of painting. I love this combination, so I'm very excited about that one and more. You can check out the list at webinars on the webinars page. All right, thank you so much for joining us here for Digital Art with Topaz Simplify. I hope, again, that this gave you some good tips and tricks on how to create your own personal digital art using Simplify. Have a great morning, evening, or afternoon, wherever you are, and we'll be talking to you soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.